in the previous video, I gave you an overview of the scale of consciousness. I went through all the levels and the whole scale you see on the screen, all the different ways of viewing it, which I explained in the previous video, which gave you a basic understanding of what this is about. So if you haven't seen that, I suggest you check it out first before you listen to this one. Because in this video, I'm going to walk you through how to most efficiently get up the scale of consciousness. And I'm going to start by saying that many people have the goal of getting into enlightenment, and that's not really a good idea, because it can easily distract you from actually getting up the scale. It can create a spiritual ego and a fantasy world of how enlightened you are and whatnot. And it can easily actually stagnate you and make it harder for you to actually climb the scale of consciousness. Because the thing is, most enlightened teachers in history, they already came from a very high level, and they took a mission here. They volunteered to come here to have to do something like teach and help people and balance out the mass consciousness and whatnot, for many different reasons altogether. And they came here, and they basically it's handed to them when the timing is right, almost no matter what they do. I've seen enough of this to know that this is the case. And if you look at historically, that most of these teachers historically, they never seem to go through all that much, in many cases at least. Maybe they sit in the field of another enlightened teacher for a while, and then they get it, or they don't. Doesn't really matter that much, because they're bound to get it either way, because they're here on a specific mission. So that's the majority really of the cases. And the other case is what I call a karmic wrap-up life, or a graduation incarnation, in which you have to tie up a lot of loose ends, karmic loose ends, and this eventually leads to enlightenment in that life if you succeed. And that's the case for a lot of people these days, because many people who volunteered to come on this ascension mission are such graduation incarnations with karmic wrap-up lives, which means you most likely have lived a pretty wild life all over the place, and you most likely came in the mid 300s or 300s somewhere, and you went down below 200, and you rapidly had a turning point in your life, and rapidly went up the scale and reclaimed your incarnation level, so to speak, and went beyond that also. And that's the case for me, myself, and that's the case for many people who came here. But still, even so, you might be bound for enlightenment. It's still not the best goal to have, because it will easily create a spiritual ego and a fantasy world around that, and there's no way to practice it anyway. So the better goal, in my view, is to reach unconditional love of the higher 500s, which basically is sainthood, because that is something you can practice, and I'm going to talk about how to do that in this video, obviously. So to get up the scale of consciousness, there are a few things you have to do, and you have to do them really consistently. And you have to get back up on the horse again each time you fall. Don't judge yourself from falling. Don't blame yourself, but you have to get rapidly as you can up on the horse and back at it, because otherwise it doesn't work. You have to be very persistent and have a lot of patience, and it also requires courage, especially in the beginning, to turn yourself around, depending on where you are in your journey. But the most important thing is persistency, with what I'm going to talk about now, because the principles are really simple, but you have to practice them every day, every waking hour. Otherwise, you can forget about it. So this is how you get yourself into the higher 500s and basically achieve sainthood, which everybody can do in theory, at least in one lifetime. It's possible for any person, although it's less likely for somebody who was born, let's say, like my father, for example. He is born right above 200 and has spent his entire life around 200. Hasn't developed much, have no interest, have no understanding of any of these things, obviously. But in theory, at least, anybody can achieve the level of love in one life. But that's very difficult depending on many things. But not everybody can become enlightened. That's all up to basically your destiny and the higher ups, the higher mind and whatnot has to be involved. You can't just will yourself into those levels, or practice something and then maybe you get there. Your best shot at getting enlightened is actually to get to the level of love first and establish yourself there, and then maybe that will happen if it's your destiny. But you can't do much more than that. So the best goal is to try to get to unconditional love, the 500s. And the first thing you have to do is to establish an inner awareness, a space inside where you are aware of your own mind stuff and your thoughts and emotions. And you have to practice this usually with formal meditation in the beginning, because if you haven't done that until you're established enough in that to be there in all waking hours as much as you can, then you don't need to sit down and meditate anymore, because you have already established that inner space of awareness of your own mind and thoughts and emotions or whatever comes up. You need to have that consistently and always be alert about that as much as you can throughout the day. That's number one. And you could call that an inner safe space if you want, because you have to be non-judgmental and unconditionally loving in that space, no matter if it's not that big, kind of, so to speak, because you have to use whatever awareness you have available, whatever percentage of your awareness you have available, you have to use to create that space. And you're going to use that space to remove whatever comes up which means that your awareness and the space keeps growing, which takes you up the scale. And the other thing you have to do when you have established this, which is basically means you have opened what I call Pandora's box, which is your unconscious mind and all this negativity which most people keep a lid on and don't want to face. Doing this automatically sort of opens Pandora's box, and things will start to come up. In the beginning it can be a little chaotic because you have so much stuff. It's sort of like a catch-up effect in the beginning, and then it sort of calms down and you get gradually new layers and new parts of the prison complex of the personality structure of the unconscious, and the negative beliefs and all that shit start to come up like on a regular basis, and you have to be able to handle that. And the way to do that is just continue to have awareness with non-judgmental awareness of whatever it is until it leaves. And that's the whole method. I mean, you have to just observe it, because each energy that comes up has a momentum behind it, and when the momentum has been used up, if you don't act it out, then, and if you don't repress it again, if you just keep it there and allow it to be there and until the momentum is spent, then it will leave you, and it drags along with it the underlying belief, usually, which caused the energy and a negative emotion to begin with. And it feels like a brick or 10 was removed from your shoulders when this happens. It's gone forever. And it drags along with it this negative belief, and that gives you an insight, basically. And you have freed up more of your awareness, a larger percentage of your awareness. As you can see, percentage integrated on the scale is the same as percentage of awareness you have available. And with more awareness available, you can see this thing in others without judging it. But the less you have available, the more you will judge what you have in yourself when you see it in others. So once it leaves you, it's gone for good. And that means that equates to having raised your level, even if it's just a little bit. And it can happen in leaps and bounds. It depends, removing one deeper tire of the prison complex of your personality can drag with it a lot of other stuff on top of it, so you can get big jumps out of the blue sometimes. It all depends, but it's a gradual process in leaps and bounds, basically. And the way you use your life is that you go about your day and you keep this awareness inside all the time. And when something triggers you, that means that an important part of the prison complex in the unconscious have been exposed and can now be basically been jarred loose, kind of, and you can now allow it to come up, and you can let that trigger play itself out, the momentum, until the momentum is been spent, and then it will leave you, as I talked before about. So the same principle applies when you get triggered as when something comes up just by itself. Sometimes things will just come up naturally, and because you have opened the Pandora's box. And sometimes you will get triggered, and that's even better because it can usually mean that you can get rid of more stuff and more deeper stuff more quickly. So that's basically the method. So anything that triggers you is just a mirror of, it's basically just mirroring something inside of yourself back to you so you can get rid of it. And the method is really simple. You have to just neutrally observe without judging and not acting it out, not repressing it again. That's the simple way of doing it every time. And you might have to, sometimes it can take days to do that, on and off. You don't have to do it all at once. Sometimes that can be done easily. Sometimes you will need more time, and you can go in and out of it, kind of. But for example, if you get heartbroken, you can it can stir up really deep-seated stuff, which is good. You can sit maybe for a whole week every day to get rid of that. I did that once. It took like a week, 2 hours or so every day for a week, until I was back to neutral, kind of, and got rid of all that, which is a very deep cleanse. So it's something to not be scared of. Actually, it can help you a lot. So most people are scared of that and try to avoid it, but that's not really a good idea if you want to climb the scale. It's actually a good thing to not avoid and just welcome. So that's the method you have to establish, and you have to establish a non-judgmental attitude towards other people and yourself via this space you have created, which is growing your awareness. Awareness is the same as consciousness, is the same as unconditional love, and this space is growing as you get up the scale, and the less judgmental you become naturally. But you can also consciously try to, when you see a judgment, you try to find out where it comes from, because it's always a projection. Being aware of negativity is different than judging it, in other people, and you have to be able to do that, be aware neutrally, and that ability will grow the higher you go up to unconditional love levels and beyond. And the other thing you have to do is obviously what Bashar talks about all the time, which is to act on your highest excitement without insisting on any outcome. Because if you insist on an outcome, you stagnate easily. You can easily stagnate into a certain path or career, because you're not open for the next turn or the next even more exciting thing to act on. And the reason acting on your highest excitement works is because the excitement contains obviously a higher frequency than you are at currently. Otherwise, it wouldn't be exciting. Excitement means this is a higher frequency, so you should move in that direction. I mean, you act on that frequency that's higher than your current one. You sort of become or take on the higher frequency by acting on it, because action is like grounding it into physical reality. And that means you now lift yourself up or bootstrap yourself up, kind of, the scale by doing that. And that also automatically brings up negativity from the unconscious, up Pandora's box into your conscious mind, because you have to let go of certain things to actually establish yourself at that higher level, which you got to by acting on your highest excitement in small and big decisions. So, and that can be tough in the beginning if you haven't done it before, because it will many times mean that you have to go against expectations from family and friends, and even what your own mind thinks it is logical or is safe. So especially in the beginning, it can be really rough to. It's like a big test. Do you have the courage to break free from the norm and go your own pathless path instead of just following a karmic groove, which most people do. They just go round and round in a karmic groove. They get caught or stagnate into. But when you go on a pathless path, which you do when you act on your highest excitement, means you're jumping from one level to the next and one stepping stone to the next. And that takes you up the scale, and it means only you can walk that path. It's a very unique path. You can't follow in anybody else's footsteps, so to speak. You're carving out your own path by doing that automatically. And that makes you a much more interesting person to the higher minds and the higher levels, who will support you in any way they can. They will support anybody who does that, gets super supported, because that's much more entertaining. It's more entertaining for God, it's more entertaining for the higher minds when people do that. If you just go around in your karmic groove, you're stagnated, it's easy. But sooner or later, people who do that will get severely touched by some life event that they're not ready to handle, because they have no inner awareness, they have no experience with it. So you can't escape it anyway. Life will touch you in different ways, and sometimes harshly, especially if you're low level and you just go around stagnated. You will usually get some kind of accident or some things to jar you loose, and many people don't even get it then, so they just continue and just feel bad about it and feel like a victim about it. So the best thing is you can act on your highest excitement. That makes you an exciting person to sort of follow for the spirit world, or the heavens and the higher minds and whatnot, because that's when you follow the blueprint and the hero's journey kind of situation. So the movies are based on. So you become like a hero in the movie, your own movie, and you become somebody that people pay attention to on the other side, so to speak. Because there's no point in paying attention to it. There's no entertainment in somebody who lives a regular life and just go around in a circle. So when you do this, you start to spiral up instead, because all the issues in your subconscious and whatnot, they go around in a circle kind of. So the lessons are repeated until you learn them, or the negative stuff is sort of repeated, and the reflections you get from it are repeated until you get rid of that, the root cause in your unconscious mind, by doing the method I talked about. And when you do that, you get different reflections that are more tailor-suited to the new level you're at, and so it goes all the way up. So the reflections you get and the lessons you get from life change, and usually they are more refined and not as harsh the higher you go on the scale. And then you spiral upwards, because you're no longer going in a stagnated circle like most people. You're spiraling upwards instead, which is what life is meant to be like. It's meant to be a spiraling upwards situation. So acting on your highest excitement is a necessity, and you should basically feel like you have no choice if you're doing it right. Like, you can't do something that goes against that, and you might have to make decisions that are look really crazy from the outside, or from the family perspective and friends. You might have to lose your friends and break off even with family. Many things can happen when you do that, because those who don't do that, they will, and especially those who are lower level, will try to hold you back if you do that. So that's the test, and especially in the beginning it can be really tough, but when you get the hang of it and you learn that it works and you get supported when you do it, then it's not so difficult anymore, and it becomes a way of life. So when you practice these two things together, namely acting on your highest excitement with zero insistence on the outcome, and that's important because otherwise you can stagnate, and you establish this inner awareness of non-judgmental, unconditional love as much as you can through all waking hours, and practice it towards your own mind and what comes up, and to other people, you have a deadly combination, so to speak. You have a very efficient combination and a way of life that will take you up the scale if you practice it every day and you don't stop practicing it. No matter what happens, you will have to continue doing that until you reach the love levels, and that can happen, and depending on many things. It can happen quick, it can take a long time, it all depends, but what can also really can help is to be in the presence of an enlightened teacher. That can really help, and usually if you're on this path, you will be taken to such a teacher which is right for you by just acting on your highest excitement. When the timing is right, you will find the right teacher for you. Although it doesn't hurt to seek one out either. I mean, there are many available for Skype session these days online, and it can be really beneficial to be exposed to that high level frequency of a non-duality or enlightened teacher in the higher levels, higher end of the scale. And there are many people available these days. It works over Skype too, even though the person can be on the other side of the world, doesn't matter. The field, the energy transmission still works, although it's not as efficient as being in the live presence of such a teacher, and it's not as efficient as going to a retreat where you have many exercises and many things going on in combination. But still, it can be really helpful to be exposed to have sessions with such a high-level teacher. But it will most likely come naturally if and when the timing is right and on your path. So you don't have to stress too much with it either if you don't want to. But you can seek it out. It doesn't hurt that to have a session no matter what anyway. So I mean, it's really that simple. It's not too complicated what you have to do. I mean, to repeat one more time, you have to act on your highest excitement with zero insistence on the outcome in small and big decisions, because this takes you up to scale by default, and it brings up negativity in you that you have to get rid of to establish yourself on each new level or each new stepping stone. And you have to view everything as a stepping stone, because you're always moving on to something next, something new. You're not stagnating on one stepping stone, which many people do. This is the biggest trap, really. Many people, they want to have a career in this and that, and they get stagnated in that instead of being open for what's next. And then you have to establish this non-judgmental in awareness and let open Pandora's box, allow anything to come up and let it go. Basically, that's the whole inner work job that you have to do consistently all the time, all waking hours. And that can be rough, because when you're triggered, you can easily lose your awareness and, act it out. But you have to not judge yourself for that, and you have to get back on the horse, and you have to continue doing that as best you can all the time, and let your awareness grow, and eventually you will be taken into the present. In the high 500s, you're basically effortlessly present all the time, and you have a lot of awareness available at those levels, and it becomes almost difficult not to practice it. When you have established yourself in the high 500s, it's almost hard to not practice it. It's almost harder to lose it than to be in it, so to speak. So you have reached a plateau level at the mid 500s, 540 and above, basically. That's a plateau level in which you have to go through maybe a dark night of the soul, because if you still have severe core issues from early childhood, they can come up, or will come up most likely in those level at some point, depending how severe they are, and that can take you into a dark night of the soul situation, which can last for years. For me, it lasted for many years. It can be rough, and you might need some kind of higher mind intervention or something to get rid of those things. It depends on many things, but that's a possibility. It will not happen with everybody. It depends on what happened to you when you were a very young child. Some people have a decent childhood. They don't have severe core issues, so they will not have a problem with this to the degree that I had, and some people have. And then if you have been on this plateau level in the higher 500s for a while, maybe years, depending, you might make the jump into non-duality and beyond, but that's really up to higher mind, higher forces. You have to be upgraded, and your nervous system has to be ready for it, many things. But if it's your destiny and you reach the higher 500s, you will be made ready for it. They will work on you from the other side, so to speak, and rewire your system and your brain, and many things will happen, maybe when you sleep, maybe when you're not even maybe you don't even notice it too much, but you will get ready, and then boom, you will make the jump into the other side, which is non-duality and beyond. But if that's your destiny, if that's what's meant to happen, not everybody who gets into the 500s will do that, because some will maybe be a teacher in the 500s instead, or some will just be a regular person, but in a high level. It all depends. You can't force yourself into enlightenment. You can seek it as much as you want, but there is no guarantee to get it. But you can always get into the level of love, which is good enough to never have to incarnate in a low level, harsh reality again. So it's a pretty good deal in that sense.